Well, good morning. I'm Peter Swore. I'm the rector here.
I'm Cliff Kerr.
I'm Claire Siegel.
And today we are going to help show you how to serve as an acolyte at St. Mark's Church. We're going to walk through the entire ceremony and show the different roles and responsibilities of each role. There are actually two different kind of positions that occur for being acolyte. The first is being embodied by Cliff this morning.
I'm going to be the crucifer, which is probably the easiest job of the three. There are three, by the way. And Claire is going to be the first server, which is probably the most intricate part of the service.
There is a second server who also participates. And server 1 and server 2, they usually carry in the candles or the torches, while Cliff today, as the crucifer, he carries the cross. You probably noticed that there are only 3 of us up here, which means we don't have a second server. And that happens on Sunday mornings as well. So we're going to show you what a typical Sunday with just 2 servers looks like, but we'll also mention what would happen if we had the full complement of acolytes, the crucifer, server 1, and server 2. So what's the first thing that we do after we've gone in and we've gotten robed?
Well, the first thing before we get robed is to get here like 20 minutes early, because if you're on time, you're actually late. You have to get a robe on and get in to start the service. The first thing we do is to light the torches, and we'll show you how we do that right away. After that's done, we usually take the programs from out in the Great Hall and put them up here for the pastor, servers, and everybody else. So I'll do that.
And part of the reason that we do that, as Cliff's grabbing the bulletins right now, is because when we process into the church, our hands are kind of full. Today, Claire, as server 1, she's going to be carrying the gospel book. If we had a second server to work with her, she'd be carrying a torch. And Cliff's going to be carrying a cross. So obviously it's kind of hard to carry in your bulletin as you're carrying stuff. So Cliff, ahead of time, has been prepared.
At this point, we're going to go out into the Great Hall, and we're going to have a brief prayer, and I'll get the cross, and we'll get ready to process.
So we'll show you how we get into the church with all of the appropriate items that are needed. Claire's going to get the gospel book off of the altar right now. Cliff's going to head out. He's going to grab the cross. We're going to meet in the back, and we'll show you what the procession looks like. All right, let's go. So you'll notice that we walked in at a slow pace. Cliff held the cross high and straight. Similarly, Claire had the gospel book elevated with the cover facing out to the congregation. You also probably noticed that when Cliff walked by the altar, he didn't bow or reverence the altar. In fact, I was the only one who initially did that. I got to the altar, I stopped there, Claire put the gospel book down, and then she joined me. We reverenced the altar to kind of represent our reverence and our thankfulness to God. And then everybody just headed over to their seats right there. So that's how we get into the church, and at that point, the service begins with the opening acclamation after we've gone ahead and sung the opening hymn. So that's how we get into church. All right, so now we've gone through much of the opening of the service with our readings, and we're at what's called the sequence hymn, which is the hymn right before the singing, before we read the gospel. That's the next time that we have a role that an acolyte takes leadership in. What they end up doing is, partway through the singing of the sequence hymn, what will happen is Cliff, who's serving as the crucifer today, he will actually leave his seat and go and get the gospel book. Just like when Claire carried it in, it's the same sort of thing. You get the gospel book, you hold it up like this, and what he'll do is he will process out to the center of the congregation. I will follow him. Once we get there, he'll offer me the book, I'll open it, I'll get it to the appropriate place, I'll hand it back to him, and all he's going to do is he's going to hold that book for me as I read the gospel. At the end of the gospel reading, I hand it back to him, he takes it back and places it on the altar, and then you get to listen to me preach for anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes, depending on what happens. Let's hope for just 7 minutes this time. All right, we're going to go ahead and walk through. We're halfway through the singing. And then I would read the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, etc. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. So that's how we get through reading the gospel. So now you've survived my sermon. Well done. And we have moved on to the Eucharist, the section of the service where we move from the liturgy of the word to the liturgy of the table, where the bread and the wine is prayed over. And this is the place where we're more or less done with the crucifer, and we've moved on to server 1 and server 2. In this case, Claire's going to show you what happens when we have just one acolyte who's functioning in the role of server 1. The first thing we have to do, just like with any meal, is we have to set the table. Then we'll get the meal ready itself, and then at the end of the Eucharist, the acolyte gets to do the fun job of cleaning the table and cleaning up from the meal. So it's actually just kind of like mealtime at home in that sense. So Claire's going to show you how we kind of set the table. It occurs in 2 different phases. The first phase happens during the actual offertory, which is I've said all the announcements have taken place, and I've said what's called an offertory sentence, like walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God. As soon as I've said that, typically the choir begins to sing. And that's the cue for the server 1. So you can go ahead and watch now what server 1 does once the offertory has begun. Go ahead, Claire. So that wasn't too hard, right? Now, all I need to do is go up there and get the table ready. We're not going to show you that right now. Instead, we'll tell you that the next stage that happens is once the offering plates are, the offering is taken And then you probably noticed that that offering, along with the bread and the wine, are brought forward. That's stage 2 of setup. So we'll go ahead and show you what kind of goes on for that moment. So we're in the midst of the offertory right now. We're all singing the closing of the offertory anthem. And at this point, the ushers have brought forward your offerings of bread and wine, and they're up on the altar already. And now there's one more thing that the acolyte needs to do. Server 1 needs to bring the water over to add to the wine. So you'll notice a few things as Claire gets ready to do this. Over on this credence table, which is the name of the table on the side here, there are 2 cruets. And this cruet is the water cruet. You'll notice that Claire's going to take the top out of the cruet first thing. And then she picks it up by the handle. Now, look at how Claire's holding it. That handle isn't facing her, it's actually facing me. And that's intentional. Watch what Claire is about to do. She just brought the water over to me at the altar. I didn't have to reach around to grab the handle from this side. She had it facing me. So I just take it like this. And now I'll say thank you to her in church speak. I simply reverence her and she reverences back to me. At this point, I'm going to go and do the work I need to do up here. I add the water to the wine. I would dry it off. And then similarly to how Claire gave me the water, I do the same thing. I hand it back to her and reverence her once again. Claire's going to go right back over to the credence table, and she's going to pick up that lovely little silver bowl. It has a special name. It's called the lavabo bowl. And you can see she's picking it up in her left hand, and she's draped a little towel over her left hand, right here, and she's holding the water in her right hand. She's going to now do something called the ablution. She's going to help wash my hands in preparation for the Eucharist. She doesn't actually put much water on my hands right now. They're basically dry still. If she were to pour a lot of water on my hands, it would go all over the floor. This is a symbolic way of representing God's purification and preparation for us. So I dry my hands off, give it back to her. I reverence back to her. And now, if Mary D'Alessandro were serving, or another priest were serving at the altar, or the bishop were here, she would move on and go to that person and offer to wash their hands as well. Now that my hands are washed, I just head right back over to the altar and we prepare for the service to continue. Claire finishes washing folks' hands, and she goes right back over to the ombre table, puts everything back to where it was, and goes back to her seat. So we've made it through the Eucharistic prayer at this point. I've broken the bread, and the fraction anthems being said during Lent. That's when we say Kyrie eleison, or during the rest of the year, it's when we say something like, Alleluia, Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. At that point, there's one more thing that server 1 needs to do. Server 1 needs to bring the glass chalice over to the altar. Up until now, we've just been working with the silver chalice, which is the one that folks drink from, right? Well, the glass chalice is the one that folks receive by intinction. And the norm of the church is when you celebrate Eucharist, you only have 1 cup on the table to represent the unity of the church, to represent the 1 cup that Jesus had. But functionally, we use more than 1 cup. So at this point, the bread's been broken, and Claire is going to just get up from her seat over there, go over, get the glass chalice, and just sneak it in right next to me. And now I would be ready to say to the congregation, the gifts of God for the people of God, take them in remembrance that Christ gave himself for you. And we would all have communion. So we finished Eucharist. Everybody has received communion at this point. So what do we have to do?
Clean up.
We got to clean up. That's exactly right. And that's what's going to happen now. And this depends in some ways on what gets left on the table, just like at your house. Sometimes the folks eating at your table do a good job and clear their own plates. Sometimes not so much. So honestly, the cleanup that we have to do depends on what is still on the table. Sometimes all the chalices have already gone right back here to the credence table. Sometimes there's still chalices on there. So what we're going to show you is as if nothing has been cleaned up yet. All the chalices are still up here. The old bread is still up here. The bursts and all of the things that cover the Eucharistic elements, it's all still up here. We're going to show you how Claire as Acolyte 1 or Server 1 helps clean up, and also what role Server 2 would have. Or when there is no Server 2, that's when we draft the crucifer back into service, because he's just been sitting around this whole time. Now he actually gets to get back up and get into the swing of things. So, communion has ended. I'm standing up at the altar ready to clean up. Claire sees that and she immediately comes right on over. Watch. You'll notice with the money, that's when Cliff steps in. He takes the offering, and you'll notice where he's going to place it. Claire, just step aside for a second. He places it underneath the credence table, not on the top. So all the Eucharistic supplies are now up here on the top, and the offering plate is down there, and there's nothing left on the altar other than the altar book and the reading book. So the altar is back to its original place that it was. So now we're just going to go ahead and end the service with our post-communion prayer, and then partway through the closing hymn, you'll get to see how we get out of church. We get to get out a little quicker than the rest of the congregation. Okay, so everybody's taken communion at this point. We've said the post-communion prayer, and the closing hymn has begun. Nancy started playing it on the organ. Now it's time for us to leave the church.
Okay, now, this is a situation where if the final hymn is a long one, I would tend to wait and check for Peter to give me some kind of a high sign to go and get the cross. If it's a shorter one, I can sometimes take it upon myself just to start going in like the second verse. That way, the cross is out of the sanctuary, and there may be a half a verse or a full verse left in the final hymn.
Cliff's exactly right. We basically want to make sure that we leave, not right at the beginning, maybe halfway through or a little more through, just so that we get to the edge of the church, back by the Great Hall, just about one verse or so before the end of the hymn. So what we'll do now is we'll show you how that takes place. Of course, there's no music that's going on. Just pretend you're hearing glorious angelic music and that we're processing out to that, right?
When we leave a little bit quicker than when we came in. We're not rushing out by any means, but the pace is a little bit quicker, so it's quick in and fast out.
And once again, you're going to notice how I reverence the altar. Cliff, who's carrying out the cross as the crucifer, when he's carrying something, he doesn't reverence the altar. In the same way, when Claire is going to get the book and carrying the book, she doesn't reverence the altar. It's only somebody who really isn't doing anything who goes ahead and does the reverencing. So we'll go ahead and show you right now how we get out of the church. La 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 la. Also. So I really hope that that helps you kind of get a sense of what it is to either be the crucifer or server one. As you can see, there are a lot of different pieces to it, but ultimately there's nothing that's particularly overwhelming about it. And what you are doing is you are the one who's leading worship, who is enabling this congregation to come together and to worship God and to meet Jesus in the bread and the wine. It's a wonderful gift that acolytes give to the congregation. And here's one of the little inside scoops that I can tell you. If you forget what to do, I'll tell you what to do. Don't worry, I'm not going to just stand there and look at you. Rather, I'll go ahead and I'll tell you what the next step is. So you're never going to be really alone. So Cliff, you want to sum it up?
Actually, the purpose for doing this was to make it understandable. It's very, very simple. It's not difficult. Anybody can do it. If you have a pulse, you can walk and carry things. You're very, very capable of doing this. Probably the most difficult part is to just be calm and understand that you're probably going to make mistakes and accept them and make believe that you didn't make a mistake. Just fake it till you make it, in other words. It's simple. There's nothing to be afraid of. We do need more acolytes. If we had 3 acolytes for each service and 4 services a month, that means we would need 12 acolytes. So I'm asking if you're willing and you would like to have the privilege of serving, just give us a call and give us contact us, and we would love to have you join our service.
Thanks for your time.